What's going on, guys? D-Rec here with Alliance Rift Gaming Outlet, bringing you fresh content for Carfight Vanguard. If you guys happen to enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for future content. I will be trying to push out more as quickly as possible, and just stay tuned for all that goodness. So, right before I jump into the video, I'm just going to give you guys the heads up. I will have a Luard and a Sharat deck profile coming up soon. I am currently waiting on a few orders to come in the mail, so when those finally arrive, I will be able to finish the decks, and I will be having those out within a day or two of each other, so stay tuned for that. Going right into the subject of today's video, firstly, I will be revisiting my meta-analysis video from back at the beginning of February. Now that set 14 is finally fully out and Stargate Booster has been out for some time now, I get to actually take a look and see what is actually working and topping in the meta versus what we had assumed that on paper looked really well, but in hindsight didn't really pan out the way players had expected it to. So I'll be going over that with some depth, and I'll be rebuilding an entire tier list, so it'll be brand new, won't be kind of like scratch and paste like I did with the last video that I posted. Additionally, I will be going over what we know so far about information regarding the next arc in Carfight Vanguard, and we'll be discussing that a little bit more in detail with what's been revealed through a few players in the Twitter feed. So, going right into the tier list, I will be starting with tier 1 with the most detail, then tier 1.5 with a little bit less detail, but explaining why they're in tier 1.5, and then tier 2 will consist of slight detail with explanations as to why they're in tier 2. And then everything else that I don't cover in this video will probably just fall into tier 3. If you guys have any decks that I might have missed, or anything that I just didn't consider as heavily, please leave a comment in the area below about your thoughts on what I discussed in this video. So, going right into the tier list, we're going to start with tier 1. For our 4 decks in tier 1, we have Victor, Chronojet, Shiranui, and Messiah. So, starting with Victor, if you guys haven't already been able to see from a lot of the metagaming going on in the English version, Victor is a very fast deck. It's very fast and it has a lot of counters to control decks. It's a lot of the new stuff in the Stargate Booster really helped this, especially with Zubat Battler Victor and Winning Champ being able to just generate hand advantages and resources is really easy. On top of that, Winning Champ lets you draw cards, you get to countercharge off skills with Zubat Battler, and then cards like Golsachi really help for the aggressive plays, and not having to worry about losing units that are key to certain aggressive combos that you would pull off during your battle phase. Cards in your Grade 1 lineup also help by giving your rearguards resist, so certain things that target specifically during the battle phase, like Denial Griffin or Lacus Karina, those cards won't be as utility for certain control decks that are up against Victor, making Victor a little bit more threatening during the battle phase because they can pull off so many more stand plays. And because of that, you can be aggressive with Victor and not have to worry about depleting resources because you're constantly drawing cards off of Winning Champ's skill, you got Zubat Battler's skill, and then just a bunch of other rearguard skills that are going on there. It's really just a setup for your favorite champ turn if you don't kill them on your winning champ turn. So the game's gotten progressively faster. Most decks can push and win first stride, so it's really key for what to consider playing. Moving on to our second spot for Chronojet. Everything that came out before it was already very synergistic with what was announced in set 14. So the addition of Heritage, Z, and a lot of the other little main deck support cards just really helped to add to that synergy and just helped counter certain matchups that were unfavorable for Chronojet, like Messiah, Chaos, anything that really controlled the board. Heritage and all the new stuff really helped get around. Heritage giving you an extra turn, and then being able to stride for free allows the Jet player to really generate that little bit more hand advantage than usual. So instead of ditching one and then doing stuff, you can just pay the costs by counterboss 1 and return a bound to grade 3 from drop. So you're pretty much good there, you just do that. So you're already generating a ton of advantage with Jet, and then you have your outs to control now. So that really sets it up for a lot of the decks in the meta, with the exception of Victor. I don't see Jet as being a very fast deck still, but because of how much advantage it can generate, it can kind of bounce back after first stride. So that's kind of why it solidifies its tier 1 spot. Moving on to our third position, we have Shiranui. Shiranui, I was not expecting to get so much good stuff, and when I saw Zonky and I saw Rene, me and my friends were all in pretty much agreement this card can win first stride. And a lot of the times between me and my friends, we have seen that it can consistently push first stride. As long as the person playing Shiranui goes first and strides first rather, they can pull it off. You're negging 2 out of your opponent's hand with Rene's skill, and then attacking 5 to 6 times between Zonky and then Rene, and then your own attacks. You can easily push for game right there. If you can rush really early, that's kind of the strat there. And if you don't, you go Rene one more time, his GB3 gives all the dominated units plus 10k and a crit. So that in itself is right there. So first stride, it's like pretty close, or it does guarantee the win. If not, second stride, easily the win. And then lastly, we have Messiahs. Messiahs really got good with Stargate Booster. Ideally, it goes a really good backup utility grade 3 for the deck, and it's a good replacement for the trial deck Alter Ego, just because it skills a little bit better that way. And then Integral helps kind of mitigate certain matchups where even if you're pushing kind of hard, certain matchups can still generate a lot of hand advantage, and having Integral really helps for keeping your opponent in check hand-wise, because you just reset them to 5. Sure, you reset yourself to 5, but during your turn you can still generate a good amount of advantage. And if you kind of just go Integral and swing, you plus 5 for the turn. So you stride, you swing, or plus 4 technically. No, you plus 5. You stride, you do a stride skill, lock something, swing, something unlocks, Alter Ego Neo skill goes off, and you draw 2. So you essentially plus 5 off of draw, discard, and then all that stuff. So you're in a solid spot, and you don't have to worry about losing out on hand because of that whole explanation. So those are our tier 1 position decks. Feel free to share any thoughts you have in the comments below about certain plays you might have, or deck tech choices you might make. And moving right along to tier 1.5, I increased the cap to 6 for tier 1.5. So our 6 decks are Overlord, Sharat, Chaos, Deleters, Asha, and Big Belly. So, starting with Overlord, I had this conversation with my friend Bailey. The deck was really good when Ultimate Strike came out, but it just kind of fell into that spot where it had that same issue at the end of 2015, where it's just too slow. The support's good, it can do good stuff, but it's just too slow. And that's kind of where it falls off with our tier 1 decks. Victor is just obstinately faster and has outs to its retire option, Overlord's retire options during battle. So the whole idea of kind of shutting down attacks is out the door with Overlord, so the only way to really stop it is to hard guard everything. And then as for Jet and Messiah generate much better hand advantage and quality hand advantage than Overlord can. Even though you have, Quintet Drive with the Purge, Jet and Messiah can recycle and do a lot of interactions with drawing cards and filtering, so you're able to get a more quality hand than a sizable hand than Overlord would, with just drive checking 5 vanilla whatevers and having a day. So really good on that part for the tier 1 decks, not so much for Overlord. And then as for the Shiranui matchup, same issue as Victor. Shiranui is just faster by leaps and bounds. So that's kind of why I stepped back, but it's still really good against a lot of other decks that are still trying to keep pace with meta. So moving on to our second spot for Sharat. A lot of the new support really helps it with soul management and guard restrict. The guard restrict options are amazing, and that just helps Sharat keep pace with a lot of other decks that are going on. But the issue is it's still too slow. It's the same basic function as it was before, but with new techs that do somewhat similar things. So you have this new, you have an almost a very similar Demonted Executioner clone, and then there's that grade 1 that does stuff at 20 soul that I didn't think was that good, and a few other things. But for the most part, it's still kind of, you know, mid-range. It's not really fast, or it's not really slow. It's just too slow for what is currently meta. The guard restrict helps for certain matchups, but outside of that, it doesn't compete that well for tier 1 spots. So, moving on to position number 3, Chaos definitely is still really strong, but again, it's the same issue. It's too slow, and it can get rushed down very fast. It can kind of bounce back in the first stride position, but with the decks that are currently in the tier 1 spot, even bouncing back first stride isn't enough if Chaos doesn't get that first stride. The issue here is that most decks can win first stride. If Chaos can't build enough advantage that way, then they kind of just fall off. You can lock down the board a little bit, but even then, the only way to really do that is to use the grade 2 and just stride first by pitching Chaos. Chaos Breaker close. And then you can kind of triangle lock their position, but even then, I think the grade 2 and close both say your opponent chooses, so kind of doesn't help when they can still keep their front row open. So moving on to the 4th spot, Deleters. Deleters are good, but same issue. They can build up to grade 3 and then delete and then push, but if they don't win by grade 3, typically most players will go grade 3 and then delete and then swing, even if their opponent's at 2. With what exists now, even that's not kind of enough unless you can end the game by grade 3. Because if you don't, you have Victor, first stride, pushes you to 6, no problem. Jet will +9, +10 for the turn. Shiranui will push you first stride. Messiahs will set up really easily and generate a lot of advantage. Messiahs is probably an easier matchup for Deleters, but it can go either way. I think Messiahs are definitely a lot stronger than Deleters, but I have to see a little bit more in testing before coming to a definitive conclusion. And then next up we have Asha. It's still really solid, but again, it's too slow. Building up resist power helps it get around certain matchups like Chaos and Shiranui, but even then, Shiranui and Chaos both don't care about resist because they either call over things or lock over things, and they're messing around with your hand more than they're messing around with your board. So that's what made Asha good, what got bypassed by a lot of new stuff. So that's kind of where Asha falls off now. But I think it can still keep up pretty easily. Not pretty easily, but it can still keep up with Tier 1. Just not as easily as it could before Stargate and Set 14. And then lastly, we have Big Belly. Same issue as Asha. It does a lot of good stuff, and it can generate a lot of advantage. And before those two sets came out, the retire option behind all the skill, the retire part of all the skills that allow you to draw cards, allowed you to kind of keep your board open and usable for certain things. But once Chaos got Close and the grade 2, and being able to combo that with the other grade 2 from Rondo and then Deluge, it made the whole quirk of playing Big Belly and retiring your stuff kind of irrelevant, because they just, you know, mess around with your hand. And same thing with Shiranui, they mess around with your hand a lot. So I think if you can go first with Big Belly, you can be fine, or you can stride first with Big Belly, be fine, just because you'll be able to set your hand up a little bit better. But outside of that, if the Shiranui player or the Victor player can go first, it's kind of like, you're not in a spot anymore. So that concludes my tier 1.5 position. Moving on to tier 2, we have Luard, Night Rose, Hari, Thavas, Gridora, Altmile, Gurgit, Blasters, Spikes, and Geese. And I'll go over Geese a little bit more. But that's my 10 decks for Tier 2. Everything else I kind of think isn't as prevalent in the meta. If someone plays it, it's usually at like a Bushi event or like a team event, and they're kind of just there for the ride, but not so much to like really be like a heavily supporting player in the meta game. So going right into the Tier 2 spots, Luard got a lot of really solid support, but with how the meta is right now, it just doesn't help that much. It's got a lot of promise for good setup and being able to get hand advantage by going first stride still. Same as it was before, with a few different quirks of getting resist and stuff like that, but outside of that, it still falls apart to Shiranui and Chaos and Messiah because of board control. Luard doesn't really have any answers to board control, with the exception of killing its own board, but even then, same issue as Asha and Big Belly. You're playing up against Chaos or Shiranui, they're not caring about your empty board, they're going to fill it with your hand. So the whole quirk is kind of overwritten by other better skills. So it makes me sad. I like playing Luard, but kind of got to move on from that. So moving on to Night Rose. Night Rose just got the promo stride. That's a box topper in set 14, which is nice. It would have been a little bit better for the deck if we had had it pre-Stargate, but now that set 14's out and Chaos and all the decks that the new Night Rose stride was meant to counter, doesn't really matter so much. It helps for your turn just by setting up a little bit and keeping your board open, but outside of that, decks that it's supposed to interact with like Messiahs and Chaos, it doesn't really matter so much. Messiahs can mess around with their own board to get advantage. Chaos can mess around with your hand to get advantage, and same thing with the Shiranui, messes around with your hand. So the main counters of the deck have been overwritten by all the new support, and everything it did before post Rummy Labyrinth, it's the same. So it's a solid deck. I wouldn't say in this meta there's any bad decks. Everything has a lot of strengths. It's not so much that certain decks are weak. It's just that certain decks just got better. And it's not so much that other decks got worse. But, yeah, Night Rose has that issue there, and that's why it's kind of sitting in Tier 2. And next up is Hari, which is in Tier 2 for the same reason as Night Rose. It's as good as it was when Rummy Labyrinth came out, plus the Hari stride. That's the box topper. So it's the same reason. I'm not going to explain it again, but that's why it's in Tier 2. Moving on to Thavas. Getting all the support it got in set 13 was nice, and it helps being able to set up and have resist force and all that, like Victor. Victor just does it better. Thavas still doesn't have a real big means of drawing hand advantage. And that's kind of where it falls off from Victor. Victor has like a de facto way of getting hand advantage and being able to push really hard first stride. Thavas can kind of push first stride, but more times than none your first stride is Commander Thavas. So, I mean, yeah, Commander Thavas. It's not really a way to get advantage because you're really just using it for the +5, and sometimes you attack from back row, but for the most part, what you're playing in hand plus your Thavas stride skill gives stuff attack from the back row. So you're really only playing Commander Thavas for the +5 now anyway. So it's just not as good as other decks are now. Next up is Gridora. She has some counters to some things in the meta, like Geese, for example. It's an okay counter, but it just kind of prolongs the game. And going up Tyrannus isn't a push. It's just a stall tactic. So you're not really doing anything by going up Tyrannus except for prolonging the game. But in that essence, I guess you're preventing them from generating advantage, so that's a good thing too. So yeah, no, Gridora has no push and no early game. She just stalls until one person decks out, which will generally be the Gridora player because of drawing too much from Overwhelm. So that's my piece on that. Moving on to Altmile, a lot of the support is really, really good for it. but doesn't fix the one grueling issue that the deck has, and that is running out of resources way too early. By third stride, you have almost no targets left, so, or even second stride. Second stride, you're almost out of targets because you're constantly multi-attacking by calling and recalling over certain units that have already attacked during your battle phase, which is what makes Fides so good, is you're doing all this multi-attacking and preventing your opponent from just guarding with one card every time. But the issue there is most decks can either draw a ton and maintain hit advantage, or first stride will kill you. So, and I suppose Altmile can have a good early game. It doesn't have a whole lot of on-place abilities, so you're okay with just kind of calling and swinging early game. But if you're not fighting for first stride, you're going to lose in this current meta. So, and I think that's where Altmile kind of falls off, is solidifying first stride. And even then, getting out of Brave status is hard. And with decks that rush really hard or generate as much advantage as it does, not being able to get out of Brave status is yeah. So you can use the starter from the Heavenly Decree Trial deck, but even then, it's a bit of a back and forth battle, and I don't think it's as good as people would like it to be. So, moving on to our next spot, Gertz Gorga. It's the same as it was in set 13. Its multi-attacking skills are really good, and its ability to recycle is okay. It's what Altmile should have been, but not as aggressive. And then, you know, +1 drive, +1 crit, and guard restrict is really nice too. So, or +1 drive and guard restrict is really good. So you're dealing with a lot of that, and playing 12 crit Gertz is kind of like the way to go. Memes. So as long as you can kind of push, you're fine. I just think more of the upper echelon decks that I listed so far are faster and do a better job of getting hand advantage and building up a board and resources and all that. So that's kind of why it's in tier 2. Moving on to Blasters, same reason. It hasn't gotten support since set 11, which isn't that long ago if you think about it, but even then, it's just an okay deck right now, and it does the same thing it's done since set 6. So it's very early game oriented with no real late game, and even then, all the other decks now are just faster. Shiranui, Victor, even Messiahs are faster than Blasters right now, with the exception of like the pre-stride turns. So it's in limbo, but I would put it in tier 2 just because of everything else being obstinately better. And then next up we had Spikes. Spikes could go to tier 1.5 as long as you're not playing Chaos or Overlord. But against other rush decks, it can win second stride, which isn't that amazing. But what you're doing with your setup up to first stride is literally just building up your hand to G-guard everything. So you're constantly building up defensive resources so that by your second stride, you're ready to push. So, but the issue there is that not only are all the new decks very fast, they're still capable of generating enough advantage to really guard everything. So I would say Spikes could go to tier 1. It's a high tier 2, low 1.5. Everything isn't kind of listed in order, so I'm just kind of like listing out where I would put them. After that, it's kind of like where would I place them in where I put them. So, but Spikes could sit at a high tier 2, low tier 1.5. Just depending on the matchup it's facing. So, and that's my piece on that. It got support a little bit in set 13. I forget which. I think it was set 13. I forget. But that's where it is right now, and I think it could be better in the future. But right now, it's where it's sitting. And then lastly, we had Geese. Geese by itself isn't that great. In most decks, it's not that great. But there are two decks that take advantage of that the most, and that would be No Seal Geese and then Amaruta Geese. No Seal for the fact that you're constantly manipulating your damage and then dealing and healing damage with rescue checks, and then No Seal's ability to keep recycling cards to your hand and being able to filter cards to your hand, so you're not worried about not having the condition to pay for Ultimate Stride. Amaruta is a little bit better at rigging triggers, so you're more focused on hitting those triggers rather than cycling through your deck to hit triggers. But in the same breath, Amaruta doesn't generate hand advantage as well as No Seal does. And No Seal's better aspect is that it can guarantee the Ultimate Stride. So that's kind of the focus there. But that's my piece on that. Geese kind of can't handle the speed of everything else. It loses to Victor, Jet, Chaos, and then Luard. Chaos can wipe the board clean, so Geese will never deal with damage. Luard can win the turn after. If your opponent's at 4, it will win. Unless they heal out somehow, but they win. Go Phantom Blaster Diablo, and then poof, there goes the game. Jet gets the extra turn, so first turn you just swing, and then second turn you bop your board up to high numbers with time leaping skills, and then the ability to just if you have cards like Split Pegasus, stuff like that, just to add a little bit of power so you can get over that gap. That's my piece on that. And that concludes my meta tier list. Moving on to the second and final segment of this video, we're going to be talking about what's been revealed so far, information-wise, regarding the new arc and information about any potential new mechanics that it could be, and then the Bushiroad livestream. So, starting off, I did a little bit of research with English. I did a little bit of research with my friends, and we found this piece in the manga for the Carfight Vanguard manga in Japan, and it had an ad for this start deck. It's a 50-card start deck, and everyone was speculating why that was, simply because, well, it's 50 cards. That's just one deck. That it doesn't include a G-Zone, which got everyone thinking, are they doing away with the G-Zone? And I don't think that's the case. I don't think they could do away with the G-Zone. That's a big part of the game that promoted a lot of interactions between players versus just call, swing, pass, call, swing, pass. I think the idea is that, or the assumption is, all the players have stuff already at this point. We're 14 sets into G era, so anyone playing the game should have a G-Zone. If not, or if you're a new player, you can get cards for a G-Zone, and it's not that they're more accessible. So, but I think the start deck is mainly just going to introduce the new mechanic, and that's it. And then, if they announce it during the live stream, which I'm thinking they're going to announce the start deck, and then they're going to announce the first set in the next arc, and that's just going to be supplementary to the start deck. So just keep your eyes out for that. I think the live stream does go on sometime this week, I think in the middle of the week, so check your Twitter feed. If you're following anyone in the Japanese format, try and see if they're posting anything, and just keep your eyes and ears open on that. And then outside of that, the only thing I would leave up for questioning is, what do you guys think the next mechanic is going to be? I know I was talking with some people, and my idea is that the idea behind Geese and being a double-sided card is going to be what Bushi does for the next mechanic. They did introduce that in Magic as what was it called? Transform. So you just, you play a card and you can transform it by, doing whatever and then turning it face up into a different card. So that would be interesting to see. And if that is the next mechanic, it would involve a lot more main deck interactions, and it would keep the game the same size as it is. When, let's make a 24 card G-Zone. That sounds like a good idea. No, But yeah, adding more things to do to the main deck would just really help the game entirely and add more thought to deck building. Hopefully, maybe something along the lines of nation-based stuff, so it incorporates more, I would say, deck building ideas than just everything's clan-based or archetype-based, so everything is pretty linear in terms of deck building. Making things nation-based might help with deck creativity and, adding staples to the game. So, with that being said, thank you guys for watching. If you guys did enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for future content. If you guys are interested in anything I have to say, just click that little bell button right there on your screen. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace out.